Whether you're using the Roland SPDSX, the Alesis sample pads, the Yamaha DTX stuff, any of it, here are my go-to samples for when I'm on a function. And as a little bonus, if you'd like to grab a downloadable version of the SPDSX patch I'm using in this video with all of the samples, you can find it in the description just down below. So this sounds a little odd, but the first thing you want to look at is actually where you're putting the sample pad. So for me, I normally put the SPDSX or any of the other stuff onto the left of the kit, so just next to the hi-hats, but I sometimes experiment with it and put it to the right, just above the floor tom. But this is important because it kind of decides where you then put the samples on the pad, because I've done stuff before where I've put a clap in a really obscure place like the middle, when actually the bottom right will be way more helpful if it's to the left of my hi-hats, because then I don't accidentally misfire or anything. And then same for a different place in the kit, that then may change depending on where it is. So just something to think about straight away. So for this video, I'm going to be having it in my normal place, which is to the left of my hi-hats because I'm a right-handed drummer, but that's where it'll live. So once you've got the placement decided, then we can dive into the actual fun stuff, which is the samples themselves. Now at this point, I'm going to presume that you already know the basics of a sample pad, so that's importing samples and using them and changing them. But if you don't know about importing samples, then the handy thing is that I've made loads of videos on pretty much every single sample pad. So just go to the channel and just search whichever sample pad, importing audio, and this face should appear. But with that, I generally use 5 of the same samples for every function, or at least if I'm doing a function, then these are my go-to 5 samples that I'll build for the rest of the show around. So the first thing is hand snaps. So with these, I recommend mixing these with the built-in effects of your sample pad, because these can sound really good as a nice reverby sort of click sound, and that works great in like a bridge or just before the chorus, and it just adds this little extra layer where it's not just this dry hand snap, it suddenly turns into something that you can use more and sounds different, and it's just quite cool. So with that, sample number 2 is actually a bass drum. And again, going on that sort of like pop track function thing, these are also really handy. And this one's weirdly specific, but I use it way more often than not. And specifically on the SPDSX rather than on something like the KT10, where it's another bass drum. But it's mostly for those dance tracks that have that build up before a chorus. It's nice to shift it onto a sample, because then your real bass drum will sound even bigger in context. And for an extra bonus, you can actually pair your real bass drum with a trigger and a 50Hz sample to get that like chesty feel that you get with that punchy bass drum. And if you'd like to see how to do that, you can check out the video just up there. So sample number 3 are claps. And these are samples that I'm pretty sure I do every single gig with. It's very rare that I have a gig without claps. And these are incredibly versatile because not only are they something that can stand on their own, but if you double it with the snare drum and the backbeat, suddenly you've got then an extra layer and it just adds to a chorus, for example. Or if you're playing disco, it's great to add to that because it's a very stereotypical disco sound. Or if you're playing classics like Car Wash. Just a quick tip with claps is that when you find a sample, what you want to do is either EQ it or find a clap sound that's got a little bit more high end and it sounds a little bit sharp on their own, and that's because you want them to cut through both the band and your snare drum, because I've had claps before that just blend beautifully with the snare drum, but then it kind of makes no difference at all because you can't hear them. So you want to have a quite sharp clap sound to cut through everything else. Sample number 4 is a sub drop, and this one I think is my favorite. So as a quick heads up, if you're watching this video and you've just heard that sample and you can't actually hear it, I'd recommend putting on some either good headphones or some bigger speakers, because this sample drops from, I think, like 150 Hertz all the way down to just below 50 or something along those lines. And if you've got something like AirPods or your phone speaker, those speakers can't actually pick that up. So if you can, I recommend watching this on some slightly nicer speakers. So this is great as a drop into a chorus, and there's not really much more to say to this. I recommend getting it and then doing it and then watching the rest of your band go, ooh. So the last one, number 5, is a high pitch snare. Now this one is amazing to pair up with those claps that I mentioned earlier, because as you'll be able to hear, it again adds to this like pop dance sort of pattern, and well, you'll recognize it. So this pattern. One of those patterns that I highly recommend learning, because it's one that sort of sneaks its way into a lot of modern music and people just recognize it as oh, the chorus is coming up because this pattern is playing. But if you can get that pattern down, then you're pretty much good to go. So if you're one of my paying members on Patreon, then you can download all of this stuff for free, so all of the samples and the SPDSX patch that you can just immediately load onto your SPDSX. But if you want the pack just, like I said, on its own, you wanted to buy it, you can head to the link in the description where it'll be on the Drum Electric website. So with that, I hope you enjoy all of these wonderful samples.